Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast, where we talk about everything health, happiness, cannabis. We'll delve into all aspects of what it means to live a powerful, healthy life. Everything from exercise to nutrition to mindfulness, and how to use cannabis as a means to alleviate some of the most common health issues we face. My motivation and passion come from the fact that I personally had to explore all these areas to deal with lifelong depression and mood disorder. For me, it's personal. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Hey, welcome, folks, to the Nurse Mark Podcast. This is Nurse Mark. This week, I had an opportunity to speak to Kate Morgan, a fellow entrepreneur and just an amazing person. In addition to being a rock star entrepreneur, she's mom to an amazing daughter who just went off to college, her first semester. Kate shares her experience in what the messaging was from the school to the student in regard to cannabis, and it's in a recreational adult use state. So it's really interesting. Sit back, relax, and enjoy. All right. Welcome to the Nurse Mark Podcast. And today we have Kate Morgan as our guest. Kate, how are you?
I'm doing very well. Thank you.
Excellent. So we're going to talk about cannabis on campus. That's our topic. And you know, cannabis has been on campus for a long time, but not the way it is today, right?
Exactly. And I think that's the interesting thing, so my daughter is going to be going to a university in a state that it's recreationally legal. And what I was kind of surprised about was during the parent orientation, they talked a little bit about binge drinking and, kind of stuff. And they touched on cannabis, and they just sort of mentioned THC and how basically if they use it, it sounded like they would be, rendered catatonic afterwards. And and I felt it wasn't one feel very accurate.
Yes,
and
not accurate at all.
And it dawned on me that I don't think people realize, because we're in a culture now. As parents, we were raised in this really hard, core, just say no to drugs.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And to the point where we don't even feel comfortable talking with our kids.
Mm-hmm.
I do want to step back and, in full transparency, as you know, I'm an entrepreneur. I'm an investor in a cannabis company. I'm also the founder of a cannabis holding company. Now, that all said, obviously, I don't look like your typical stoner. And
I don't know. You look like a couple of stoners I know, but no, you're right. Not typical. I mean, we've known each other a while, and I've never known you to be a cannabis user even. So,
it's, I think in today's world, because I'm not, so I don't even like to smoke. And I think when we think of using marijuana, it takes us back to, smoking weed, And one of the thing about smoking marijuana is it's less risky in some places. And I think we know, we're hearing a lot about edibles.
Mm-hmm.
And so what I think is really important is when we look at edibles, it's all different types of edibles and why it can be, more risky for colleges, college age kids going onto campus, because it's so much easier and discreet and cheaper. Like there's just so many reasons why,
Let me tell you, it's not just the college campus folks that are having issues with edibles. So I do a lot of speaking events where I'll do cannabis education events. And, I'm talking to people who are anywhere from college age to 70 years old, 80 years old. And inevitably, there are always people in the room who will talk about their adverse experience with a brownie or a cookie or a gummy that somebody had given them. And so it's a common thing. I mean, it's common, and a lot of people have this negative experience with it.
Which is a shame because I think, if you're reasonable about it,
Mm-hmm.
it can be very safe. And that's really what I'm hoping to talk about. So
We
with,
will.
yeah, so with my startup, it is actually geared towards microdosing for women, primarily 35 to 55.
Mm-hmm.
Which is, kind of interesting because that's also the age demographic for the parents that have kids that are now going into college. And so, I want to kind of talk about how you can teach your kids who may have never been exposed to edibles, how, and cannabis in general, how
Yeah.
to help them feel a little bit more comfortable and confident where they're not going to run into issues. And maybe share with some ways that they can, parents can feel more comfortable as
Mm.
well. And I think, in starting, and like you just said, in working with your client base, education is so, it's paramount for people to feel in control.
Right.
So in our brands that we're developing right now, it's all stuff that are quickly absorbed, because most of the time when people take edibles, it takes 2 hours before you get the effect. And
Yeah, everybody's different. It could be anywhere from an hour to two. You're right.
exactly. And so, say you're 2 hours into it and you're still not feeling something, but your friend, they're an hour into it and they're starting to feel something. So you say, well, maybe it's because of me. So then you take a little bit more. And
Right.
next thing you're having a Maureen Dodd moment and you're hugging the porcelain,
Mm-hmm.
king, queen, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I think when we talk about edibles, is maybe even like kind of looking at some of the other applications. So, tinctures are actually a fantastic edible because it's all done sublingually. So, you're using it under the tongue, it absorbs very quickly, and you can really modulate your experience. Where I think, if you're eating a brownie or a cookie, it can be a little bit more difficult, particularly if you're new to it.
Mm-hmm.
And if you're, this is your first foray into it, sort of looking at something that's going to
Yeah,
have,
I,
right?
I'd agree. I'd agree that tinctures are easier to kind of figure out what you're actually getting, as like 5 milligrams, 10 milligrams. Some of it is absorbed under the tongue. However, it is oil based. So there's not a lot of evidence that all of it gets absorbed there. So you're still going through the route of digestion, so it's still going to be maybe an hour before you feel the full effect of what's going to happen with a tincture, but you'll get some immediate effect for sure. Yeah. But it's easier. Like the problem is in edibles, it's, we all know at this point, is consistency. So one edible may have 20 milligrams and one edible may have 10. And so you never know what it's going to be.
Well, and on top of it, people, I think, they just sort of lump it together with you're using some sort of marijuana. Well, what's happening is they're extracting butter.
Mm-hmm.
They're making butter from the extraction of the flour.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, as you know, there's all different types of flour. So you take something like Bruce Banner, which is a strain has right now is charting the highest THC psychedelic.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're distilling that down into butter and you're adding that, it could have a more. It's not going to have maybe that entourage effect. And entourage is something that really does play into how somebody's going to feel.
Oh yeah.
And, and I think that a lot of people don't understand that. They'll talk about different. Everybody knows about sativa and indica, but there's really so much more, particularly when you start looking at, marijuana this has hundreds of cannabinoids, and getting that right mixture of whether it's the terpenes, because if you have a strain that's going to have limonene, it's going to be a little bit more uplifting. And if you have my strain, it's going to be a little bit more sedating. And that all happens, they don't talk about it when they're, making this butter, what the ultimate effect is going to be, unless you can really understand. So that's why, they talk about, start low and go slow.
Yeah.
Actually,
The problem is that each batch is going to be different too, because each grow is going to be different. Even if you are using the same line, it's like wine. Think about it. It's like,
exactly.
The soil conditions. And so you're going to get a different grow, even if you're doing it in an indoor grow, although it's better that way, I think. But you're right. So it's about the additional components that are within the plant.
Yeah.
And extraction plays a huge role in that too, because how you extract it has a direct impact on what you're going to get out of the plant. So a lot of the cheaper extraction methods don't bring any of the terpenes forward. So they're lost, they're wasted.
Yes.
And so you're not going to have, as you mentioned earlier, the entourage effect, which is all of those things working together to really give a good experience.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think, if folks can feel more comfortable with production, whatever's being manufactured, if they find something, really trying to figure out, what works best for them, whether it is a tincture, a gummy, or, a lozenge. I mean, those are the things that I tend to steer towards. And we don't see it. So being based in, Massachusetts, we don't see much with breath strips. However, and that was the trigger for me in looking at this, with cannabis on campus, is in Seattle, you can actually get breath strips, 10 milligram, and for $3.
Mm-hmm.
It's 10 milligrams is actually for somebody, like myself, who's not a big user.
Yeah.
That's a lot. That's a lot. But think about it. So you get 12 breath strips. That's keeping you high for a good 4 days. A lot cheaper than trying to buy a pint of vodka and get it, caught in your room with it, right? These are just small, and you can just slip them in a desk, so. Yeah. So, and I think that's the point that I'm hoping is that, parents can kind of sit down with their kids and say, okay, well, you probably will experiment, and I'm okay with it, because guess what? You're going to school, and it's legal. It will probably become, before they even come out of college, it will probably become descheduled.
We should hope so.
Yeah. So if it's our responsibility to tell them about, drinking, I think it's also our responsibility, and contraception. I think parents are far more comfortable talking about contraception right now than probably talking about, their kids using marijuana.
Of course they are, because the conversation has always been around contraception. Oh, let's talk about it. Let's talk about it. So you've had that whole thing, all during the time when I was growing up. It was, all about good, safe sex practices. And it was always the conversation that you talked about earlier, and that's drugs are bad, and you remember, I'm surprised that at orientation, they didn't show the 2 fried eggs, and this is your first time, right?
It did feel, it really felt like that.
Madness, right? A kid from a 1936 movie, based on no science at all. And, so it's the conversation that's been in play forever and ever. So you're right. This is an awkward conversation that parents are going to have with their kids, for some.
Yeah, for some. And I think it's going to be even more awkward, because guess what? They're not experimenting either.
Yeah, right.
They're not, and that's why, I look at it from the perspective of, unfortunately, and, that's one of the impetus for me starting, my company is really demystify cannabis for women, because I get, if you go to a dispensary, you are kind of hanging out with a bunch of stoners, in flip flops and neck tattoos.
It's a weird experience. I recently went and went through a dispensary, and it was just a strange experience. I had to show my ID 3 times to 3 different people, and then I got up to the counter, and there's a whole bunch of other people around in a very small space, and there's a whole bunch of products, and they're talking about this, that, and it was just like this total not positive experience.
It's very overwhelming.
Yeah, yeah, and I could see that there are a lot of people who are not going to enjoy that.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
So, and that's one of the things that we're promoting is, working with women 35 to 55, some older, some younger, who cares, whatever, to actually bring them to dispensaries during a VIP hour. So so we meet. We take a van during that time. We explain everything. The dispensary is, basically closed off just for the people attending, and we want to encourage women. But we want women, if you think your kids are going to experiment, and it's like sort of like talking about getting drunk and never drinking, right? Like, how do you tell your kid not to? How not to avoid binge drinking and all of that.
Right.
And, I'm a big proponent that, your kids are canna curious. You might as well be canna curious too. It's not going to turn you into a stoner. You will not have, fried egg brain.
That has been dispelled. That is no longer the case.
Exactly. And it doesn't, and I always tell, folks, as they're looking into it, start with CBD, THC, because everybody's talking about CBD now. Obviously, you are.
Yes, yeah. I talk about it all the time. My business is a CBD business.
Yep. And CBD, and CBD is fantastic. And I always describe it as, because people want to understand what I'm promoting when I talk about recreational, because I'm a big believer for it medicinally, but on a recreational side.
Mm-hmm.
CBD, if you're having one of these days, it's going to relax your shoulders.
Mm-hmm.
Me, who I tend to have a lot of anxiety, which again, college kids end up having, my mind's still going with the CBD. Mm-hmm. So the 1-to-1 ratio, now my shoulders are relaxed and my head is clear. It feels on par with if I had a glass or 2 of wine. I am not a mess. It just is taking the edge off. And that, and that's the important thing of, and that's when we talk about that, whether a woman is kind of curious or wants to kind of feel what it's like, because when we think about, again, using marijuana, it's taking us back to that high THC. And you know this, you talk to somebody, they're like, oh, well, when I did it, I was paranoid and hungry. Well, that's because you had a strong psychedelic experience with it. It was probably pretty potent, and you have no idea what the strain is.
Right.
So dial it back, try a microdose, keep it about 5 milligrams of THC, or do a combination 1-to-1 ratio CBD THC. It at least gives you some of that exposure. Again, I'm more comfortable using gummies or tinctures or something that's going to be a little faster acting, because also I don't want to wait for 2 hours before I can get my shoulders back down. Like if I'm coming back to work, I want to be like, all right, I want to decompress now.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, the way that you take it is really going to have an effect on how long it's going to take to actually have the effect.
Yes.
And, if you're gonna swallow it, it's going to take an hour minimum. Yeah. It's just the way it is, because it's going to be digested, and that's how long it takes to do that. So, you're kind of stuck with that. Now, if you smoke, and I don't smoke either, But if you smoke, that's always the fastest route. I mean, it's always going to be an immediate effect because it's immediately in your bloodstream. It's not metabolized anywhere. It's just there.
Yeah.
So, but it's not going to last long, right? It's only going to last an hour.
It will, yeah. But it does, yeah. It's, I think one thing that always makes me, particularly when you start talking about vaping, is when you vape, kids don't know the difference between, using, earwax or dabbing, as it's called, which is super potent, opposed to an oil-based vape.
Right.
So,
I'm not a fan of vaping. I just don't. It's just too many variables for me. Being in the healthcare profession, I just can't say that I'm positive on it. Right. I'm just like,
yes.
I tell people don't. It's not worth it. It's not worth taking a chance in your lungs. I mean, they're so delicate, and we breathe in so many other things anyway. You put that stuff in, it's a wild card. You just don't know. And I just read a report this morning. I read a report that there's issues around the country now where like 20, 30 people now are in the hospital, primarily younger teenagers, from vaping. And they were vaping cartridges that were bought off the street, and they're from China, they're knockoffs, and they have severe lung problems. Now, some of them are in the ICU on ventilators. I mean, it's that bad.
It does not surprise me.
No, I mean, they come in with pneumonia-like symptoms, and they don't get better with treatment. They get worse. And so they tried to figure it out, and it has its direct relation to vaping. So I'm not a fan of that method of delivery. But definitely I am a huge fan of low dose edibles. Huge. I've had, people just have such a much better experience that way. And so one of the things to know about THC and cannabinoids in general that I think is very important is that they're biphasic, which means when you have a low dose, it does one thing and it's really good. And when you have too much of it, it's a bad thing. So when people talk about the adverse reaction, what has happened is they've had too much THC and it's caused a panic attack. It will cause you to feel like you're going to die. Like you said, hugging that person in God. Yeah, you feel like that's the experience that you're going to have. And I swear to God, that's why I stopped smoking like 30 years ago, because I would have panic attacks because the THC level had risen in what was available. And, it was a horrible experience. So I stopped. And then I got reintroduced to edibles just such a much different experience. So, kudos to you for trying to give people that positive experience. What I equate it to? I talk to people all the time about it. I say, think back to when you first started drinking. You had a few adverse experiences. You figured out a bottle of wine wasn't your number. It was like maybe 2 glasses, right? It's like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah, and you said it earlier. It's go low, go slow. Like 5 milligrams, beautiful place to start. And everybody is different. Like for me, 10 milligrams is just fantastic. I'm going to go out and have a great time. I'm not going to be, impaired. It's going to be just perfect. 20 milligrams, I'm probably going to stay home and watch a movie and eat a bag of popcorn and have fun with everybody. Still great, still fine, but there's a difference there, right? Yeah. So I know where I'm at. Like 10 milligrams is a beautiful place for me to be.
Yep.
But everybody's different. I have friends that 10 milligrams, they're not even going to feel it, because everybody's receptors are different, and 20 milligrams for them is a beautiful thing. So it's totally unique to you.
So you've talked a lot about sort of the baked edibles.
Mm-hmm.
What about gummies and lozenges?
Yeah, I mean, there's lozenges, there's mints, there's gummies. I mean, there's a lot of different product on the market today, and it's all the same. idea is that, you're going to ingest it. It's going to take a bit for it to have an effect. And, you really want to go slow. You don't want to jump right in and say, people wait a half an hour and they say, oh my gosh, I didn't feel anything. I better eat the rest of that gummy. And that's when the trouble starts. Because an hour later.
And you even talked about, sort of that compounding of, because all of a sudden you can go from 0 to 60.
Yeah. And that's the problem is when you've done that, when you've eaten that edible, is that the duration of how long that lasts is longer, right? It's gonna be 4 to 6 hours. You're gonna be like, this isn't good. So go slow again.
Yeah.
It's something you try on a Saturday night. You go to one of your events, and you try it out, and you figure it out.
Right. Well, and I do hope, some of this gets across to parents as they go dropping their kids off, just to say, hey, here's why the apples could be a challenge for you.
Totally.
Advice.
If they were like the important things to tell your kids, it'd be go low and go slow. If you're going to experiment, just start off very, 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 very small. And wait, give it time. And,
Absolutely.
what else would you say to parents? What would parents say to their kids? Yeah.
I think all it takes is just a few minutes, a few minutes to, explain, absorption and, making sure that they understand a little bit about how, like you said, it takes 6 to 8 hours for your digestion, go from here all the way through your small intestines. That's 8 hours.
Yeah.
And so, do you really want to be still stoned 8 hours?
Right. Yeah. Incapacitated for 8 hours. Yeah. Seriously. Oh, yeah. So, yeah, you have to have a little forethought, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And that's why, I think it is important for, the parents to experiment so they can explain as well. They're going to be faced with it. Might as well sort of understand that it is legal. It will become descheduled. It's not a big deal, but keep your kids safe. Help them understand.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. Help them understand. Yeah. Yeah. Great. Great. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's it. That's
it. That's great. Well, Kate, thanks for being on the podcast and talking about this, because we need to have parents know. We need to have parents know and to have the conversation, and it's okay. It's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Thanks so much for all that you do.
Hey, you too. So if you do have any contact info that you want to share right now, I'll have it up on the show notes. Is there anything you want to share now?
Sure. I'll post it after. It's actually my direct email. So it's just kmorgan at Genius Veritas. It's Latin. So that is my holding company. So probably easier to screen capture, right?
I know it's going to be up in the show notes wherever you're listening to this podcast. So, great. And, thanks again, Kate. And
thank you.
That's a wrap, folks. That's a wrap. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you next time. Hey, folks, thanks for tuning into the Nurse Mark podcast. I hope now you have just a little bit more of an insight as to what is going on the campus in regard to cannabis, especially in an adult use recreational state. What's the messaging that the kids are getting when they get there? It was really interesting, and I hope that you enjoyed it. Remember, this is Nurse Mark saying health, happiness, cannabis.